Hi YouTube, this is Catherine Michelle. Today we're going to go over the death of Jennifer Jaynes. She was a novelist and a writer, and her last book was titled Malice, which covered the vaccine and big pharma industry. The preface of the book is about a family that has a child, and the child gets a vaccination and then subsequently dies. Now, I have not read Malice yet, but I do plan on doing so. So I just think that that's just pertinent information. It's just something to keep in mind regarding this young lady's suicide or stated suicide. As of right now, I'm not saying it wasn't suicide, but I'm saying there's enough associated with this case to make it suspect for me. Again, with what we have at this time, I'm not really sure. Suicide was the correct answer. Anyway, as you see, here's her name, Jennifer Michelle Jaynes. And then the people involved, let me get rid of this stuff on my system. The people that they interviewed was Terrence O'Brien, which was her stepfather, Rita O'Brien, her mother, Brian James, her ex-husband, and Burke Bryant, who they say they spoke with and was a witness, although there is nothing in here, no comments, no notes, nothing from Burke Bryant that the police have noted. So why they're including him as a witness, I have no idea. But anyway, this is just the information of those involved. Don't think that's really that pertinent. None of our business. But anyway, we're going to go on to the narrative and to the reports. This is from Officer Wedgeworth. It says, while on patrol, I heard the SO dispatch give out a suicide call on 1327 Bridle Path in Hideaway Lake. How do they know it was a suicide? They got a call from a distraught mother, and right away the dispatch is saying suicide? No. That's bad police work. No one was there. No one saw this event take place. They do not know when a call comes in if it was suicide or if it was murder. But right away, from the get-go, it's suicide. I was close to the location, so I checked en route to the location. A short time later, I arrived along with EMS. When I made entry, I saw a young white female lying on the floor and an older white female doing CPR on her. When I first looked at the subject, I could tell that she had been deceased for some time. Myself and the EMS crew took the older female outside, and I secured the scene and waited on other units to arrive. SCSO Deputy Unit Number 32 was the first to arrive. I stood by to keep the scene secure. No further action was taken by me. Now we have Officer McClanahan's report. On Monday, November 25, 2019, I, Detective Sean McClanahan, along with Detective Drew Shepard and Detective Josh DeCur, were called to a suicide at 1327 Bridle Path Lane in Lindale, Smith County, Texas. Now, it's interesting to me how they keep with the narrative. You know, everyone is saying suicide. No one is investigated, but they're all sticking to the plan. Upon arrival to the Hideaway Lake subdivision, where the residence sits to the north side of Bridle Path Lane, facing to the southwest. Sentence doesn't make sense. The residence is a single-family brick home, tan in color. We were advised by Deputy Wedgeworth that the deceased was in the back room building unattached to the residence. I walked into the room and observed a white female lying on her back. I observed a large wound on the left temple of her head. I observed the chair where the deceased was sitting had a large pool of blood on the floor to the left side. I noticed a firearm sitting under the deceased's right hand. I later found out that MS had turned the body around on her back and that she was sitting in the chair when she was found. The firearm was an FN 5.7. The family did not know where she got the gun. Justice of the Peace Dunklin arrived on scene and advised we could examine the deceased. I checked the right side of her temple to see if there was an exit wound. Also, I felt the side of her head. I found a single bullet just under her hairline. I then spoke with the deceased mother, who confirmed she was left-handed. consistent with the wound at the scene. My comments on this is, I walked into the room and observed a white female lying on her back. I observed a large wound on the left temple of her head. Cool. Why? How is she on her back? I observed the chair where the deceased was sitting had a large pool of blood on the floor. Okay. I observed the chair where the deceased was sitting had a large pool of blood on the floor, to the left side. I noticed the firearm sitting under the deceased's right hand, which makes sense if she was moved and laid down on the floor. I later found out that EMS had turned the body around on her back and that she was sitting in the chair when she was found. Who found her? Who found her in the chair? Who moved her to the floor? Not a very good report, McClanahan. Now let's move on to Wedgeworth. I, Deputy B. Wedgeworth, was dispatched to a suicide at 1327 Bridle Path Lane. I mean, I love how they're very consistent. Everyone is, it's a suicide, state it's a suicide right at the beginning. They don't know. It was learned by dispatch that a white female, later identified as Jennifer Jaynes, had taken her own life with a self-inflicted gunshot, to the left side of her head with an F&N 5.7 caliber pistol. Now, how did dispatch know that this young woman, Jennifer, had taken her own life? They're dispatch. They're sitting in a chair miles away from the scene, and they're telling the officers it's a self-inflicted gunshot wound? No. If this is protocol, oh my goodness, change your damn protocol. They don't know that. They get a call from a distraught family member, and a family member is just that, distraught. They don't know. They're not the investigator. They see a shocking scene, and they will say what makes sense to them at the time in order to deal with the death of their loved one. No one, no police officer, no EMS, no dispatch should take that as written in stone. They should hear that and say, I don't know. Okay. It was, no. I'll go on. Upon my arrival, Miss Jaynes was on the floor, and EMS had determined that they were not going to work the corpse due to lividity, and rigor have already been set in, and the body was cold to the touch. That is normal. That is correct. That is exactly what they should have done. However, if lividity and rigor have set in, and she was found sitting in a chair, she's going to be in that same sitting position when she's moved to the floor, lying on her back. Imagine lying on your back and put your legs in a sitting position like they would be if they were in a chair, but you're on the floor on your back. That is the position that she should have been found in, but that is not what they are describing. So, anyway. Either rigor had not set in, or EMS, they usually know their stuff. I mean, if lividity is there and rigor is setting in and she's cool to the touch, she would not be lying flat. But yet there's no true description of how her body was found, and I want that noted. I observed there to be no signs of forced entry or foul play involved in Mrs. Jaynes's death. I notified Sergeant Hatton of all the details of the case, and he made the determination after the body had been moved and there was no evidence of an exit wound on the body to call for detectives to the scene. If there's no evidence of an exit wound, how did they find the projectile underneath her right ear and the hairline? There was evidence of an exit wound. Okay, let's continue. Deputy D. Thompson held the scene and kept a crime scene log until detectives arrived and determined that the death was in fact from the GSW and there was no need for an autopsy, and they released the scene and body to the funeral home after Justice of the Peace Dunklin from PCT2 arrived and conducted the inquest. Detectives took several items from the home to continue the investigation. Nothing further at this time. Deputy B. Wedgeworth, number 32. Okay. She died alone. No one saw it. No one heard it. She was found alone, deceased, and they determined not to do an autopsy. I call that shoddy police work. And is that legal in the state of Texas when someone dies unattended? Is that mandatory by law for an autopsy to be done? Or what? Should be checked into. Now we're going to do Officer D. Thompson's report. On 11/25/19, I, Deputy D. Thompson, was dispatched to 1327 Bridle Path Lane in reference to a suicide. Again, they have two sentences, and the first one is stating suicide when Thompson doesn't have a clue. I arrived and assisted Deputy B. Wedgeworth by gathering information and starting the crime scene log. That's all they had to say. Now here comes the long one. Here comes the long report. Okay, like I said, now we're going to go over the 3-page report, and this report is by Shepard, Officer D. Shepard. 11/25/2019, S.D. Shepard. On 11/25/2019, SCSO Detective S. McClanahan and I responded to 1327 Bridle Path Lane, Smith County, Texas, on a report of a dead person, possible suicide. Okay, kudos to Officer Shepard. This is correct. It's of a dead person, possible suicide. They don't know, and he didn't know, so he's not putting suicide. Correct. Correct. So thank you. We met Detective J. DeCur at the residence. We were escorted through the main residence and into the backyard to a detached building where the body of the deceased was located. 1327 Bridle Path, Lindale, Smith County, Texas, was a single-family residence located in the Hideaway subdivision. The house was painted brown brick with composite roofing, with a front door facing south-southwest. The small building office where the deceased was found was located in the backyard of the property toward the west fence line. The building was a wooden, mobile-style construction sitting slightly off of the ground. The only entrance door was located on the east side of the building toward the south of the building. Deputy Wedgeworth gave us a brief overview of the situation. Deputy T. Goodman was on scene and told us that he arrived with EMS and they found the deceased inside the backyard building. Now, I don't recall seeing a report from a Deputy Goodman. We have Wedgeworth, McClanahan, Wedgeworth again, and now Shepard. There's no report from Wedgeworth here, and Goodman. So where's Goodman's report? Especially if they're first on scene and they arrived with EMS. Anyway, they found the deceased in the backyard building. The mother of the deceased was beside her performing CPR. EMS checked for vitals and found the deceased cool to the touch. EMS Deputy Goodman, along with the deceased mother Rita O'Brien, left the building, which was secured, and detectives were summoned. Now, some people have made comments about this, and I really want to clarify to help everyone understand that it is perfectly normal and to be expected of a parent who walks in and finds their child dead, regardless of the state, for the most part, of the person's body, unless obviously it's advanced decomposition. It's not what I'm talking about. But even though Jennifer Jaynes was quote unquote in rigor, they don't state how far that rigor had advanced. Was it full rigor to where her whole body is going to be stiff, or was it partial rigor? They don't say, and so that's not helpful. But when they walked in and they found the mother doing CPR on her daughter, that is perfectly normal. Unfortunately, though, that does interrupt the scene, and it does contaminate. It moves things around, and but we cannot fault the mother for that. It was her child, and she found her dead, and she was doing what any parent would do. So my heart just goes out to her. I just can't imagine that poor woman. But yes, that would be something a parent would do, is doing CPR even on a deceased child. But it is not normal in this situation for EMS to do CPR. Detectives walked around the building and did not observe anything disturbed nor suspicious. Detectives entered the building and observed the deceased white female lying on her back in a mid-thigh sleeping gown. The deceased head was turned slightly to her left. Now again, was she in full rigor? Was she not in full rigor? How do they know it was mid-thigh sleeping gown? This is just, even though, who's a Shepherd? Even though Shepherd, I believe this is really good writing so far. But he does, even Detective Shepherd, I don't know if it's he or she, I'm sorry, is not describing the full position of the body. And so, again, how do we, just reading this, understand that they would know it's a mid-thigh sleeping gown? The deceased's head was turned slightly to her left. She was lying in front of a recliner/rocker chair. A large pooling of blood was observed on the floor to the left of the chair and along the left side of the chair. The deceased was observed to have blood on the left side of her head and a small pooling of blood under her head. So this is what I have suspect right here. How did she end up with a small pooling of blood under her head? That would not have occurred if they placed her on the floor. You don't bleed after you're in rigor and lividity is set in. There's no blood to come out. So what was that about? Was she already lying on the floor when the mother found her? They say she was found in a chair, but was she really? A black-colored semi-automatic pistol was located on the right side of the deceased under her right arm. Okay, this doesn't really mean much of anything because she was oops, sorry about that. She was removed. She was moved supposedly from the chair, but we don't know by who, and placed on the floor. So, yeah, the fact that the gun was found by her right arm is not surprising in the situation. The body was found directly in front of the entrance door near the west wall of the building. A computer desk and computer was located on the northeast side of the inside of the building, and the cell phone was found and recovered from the right inside. Let me start this all over. A computer desk and computer was located on the northeast side of the inside of the building, and the cell phone was found and recovered from inside the top right drawer of the desk by Detective DeCur. Disposed of notes were found and recovered by Detective DeCur inside the trash can directly inside the entrance door on the right along the east wall. Now, we don't have measurements of this building yet. So the fact that she is found in front of the door, because it says right here, the body was found directly in front of the entrance door near the west wall, yet the trash can is where the so-called suicide notes are inside a trash can on the right side of the wall. And this, again, they don't find that suspect at all. If someone were truly writing suicide notes, they're not going to put them in a trash can. Anything in a trash can means it's trash. It's not wanted. It's not meant. Why would someone who's going to shoot themselves in the head take the time to write notes and then throw them away? Right there, they should have said, okay, we need to look further into this. But they didn't. Instead, they start really following the suicide narrative. Justice of the Peace Dunklin responded to the scene and gave permission for detectives to move the body of the deceased. A single shell casing, 5.7 by 28 millimeter, was found underneath the deceased body. Detective DeCur recovered the pistol and shell casing. The spent projectile was found tangled in the hair of the deceased on her right side, just above and behind the right ear. Okay. Right here. the shell casing is under her body. I want to see the drawings. I want to see how far her body was from that chair. How far was that shell casing from that chair? Where was it in direction to where they believe she was sitting when that shot was fired? Shell casings eject. They don't just drop down. That they know. That they should have checked right away, because this is something that I would look at when I would go on a scene. And I would check to see where things would be found, and does it make sense to what the scene is saying to me. And right now, there's not enough information for me to say this was suicide. In fact, this is telling me that it's more suspect than truth. Okay, and they did find that the projectile had exited behind her right ear. So there was an exit wound, and the spent bullet was recovered by Detective DeCurr. And Shepard goes on to state, I took possession from Detective DeCurr of the recovered items inside their respective packaging and retained custody of the items until we returned to our vehicles, at which time I placed them inside the trunk of Detective DeCurr's vehicle. The items included black FN pistol with the magazine and the unfired rounds, with magazine, unfired rounds, spent casing, spent projectile, typed letters, iPhone. This is very, very important. Not only what gives me pause is where the casing was found, and the fact that the typed letters, quote unquote suicide notes, were in the trash can. I briefly interviewed the recently divorced spouse of the deceased, Jaynes, who had been on scene since before detectives arrived while awaiting the arrival of J.P. Dunklin. Okay, so he's there pretty darn fast. He's there before anyone else. It's the mother and Jaynes. Now, no one else mentions Jaynes being there except for Shepard, and he says he had been on scene since before detectives arrived. Now, yes, detectives were called later, but we don't know when he was at the scene. Let's continue. Brief synopsis of interview. Mr. Brian Jaynes stated that he and the deceased, Jennifer Jaynes, had been divorced since the summer of 2019, but were married for years and shared 2 9-year-old twin boys. Okay, so this is November of 2019, and they were divorced in the summer of 2019, so the divorce is still relatively new. He stated that he did not choose the divorce. He was told by Jennifer earlier in the year she wanted a divorce, and he found that she had a boyfriend. Now, my question to you is, what difference does that make? Why is this narrative being planted, and who cares who asked about the divorce? I don't know. This to me is overshare. And again, why? He said the divorce was amicable and that they did a pretty good job of co-parenting. It sounds, I don't know, it sounds to me if he's bringing up the fact that he's saying she wanted the divorce and that he found she had a boyfriend, that sounds bitter to me. And the divorce was amicable, we don't know. That's strictly between the two of them. And if they did a good job co-parenting, again, strictly between the two of them, we don't know. We don't have her side of the story. He stated that she had also been placed on suicide watch in the summer and had been struggling with deep depression for a while. Again, this to me is planting narrative. I've went through Jennifer Jaynes' Facebook page, her Twitter account, her Instagram account, everything I could find that Jennifer Jaynes had up and running. And I went back through the summer months, and there is nothing in any of those media outlets that state she was depressed. Nothing looked like she was depressed. And yes, I understand people can fake things on social media, but there is zero mention of suicide watch. Anyone who's on quote-unquote suicide watch, you are put into a facility. It's not just, oh, okay, we're going to let them run free. So do I believe this statement? No, and not just no. Hell freaking no. And she didn't seem depressed. In a lot of her comments she was super excited about stuff that was coming up for her life. She had discovered a way to beat her depression that was working for her. Her outlook was very positive, which is an exact contrast to what Brian Jaynes is saying about her at this time. Okay. He said it was a total surprise, although not surprising that she was dead because of her recent mental status. Again, narrative planting. What he is saying is an exact opposite to what she is stating on her Facebook page especially. He states she had told him that she could not focus and could no longer write. She was a published novel writer. Okay, I'm going to continue on here. He states that she had told him that she could not focus, and I know I just read this, but that she could not focus and could no longer write. She was a published novelist and writer. Mr. Jaynes stated that they okay, let me go back here to the part where she said she told him. No. Oh my God. Sorry, people, just reading seems to be not fundamental for me at the moment. He states she had told him that she could not focus and could no longer write. She was a published novel writer. This is completely taken out of context. As a writer myself, I myself am a published writer. And I can tell you this could have just been a conversation she had had with him. There are times, a lot of times when writers can't write. You get this writer's block and you can't focus because things are going on. Are the kids in school? She had, Thanksgiving was coming up. Christmas was coming up. There's all these things which interfere and you're like, oh my gosh, I just can't focus. I can't write right now. That could have been the conversation. But how he is presenting this is that this is supposed to back up his narrative of she was so depressed, which I am calling baloney on. I'm saying that just doesn't fit. So this means nothing to me at all. And as an investigator, I just take this statement right here and I throw it in the trash where it belongs. It is hearsay. It means nothing. It's taken out of context. So therefore, it's ridiculous. Then he goes on, this report goes on to state, Mr. Jaynes stated that they texted each other last night on 11/24/2019, and she was to pick up the boys around 9 a.m. on 11/25. He had not observed anything noticeable different of the past week or so. So here we go. We have this woman who's supposedly getting ready to commit suicide within hours of getting off the phone with this man, texting back and forth. And it's interesting how he can state up here how she was so depressed by all their phone conversations, and then down here she's okay because, and he could tell that by her texts. Now, if her text messages are coming across as she's in a good mood and she's, going to be picking up her boys. Again, why is this not causing the police concern? He felt there was something wrong when she did not show up at 9 a.m. or call to pick up the boys. Mr. Jaynes stated that he had no idea where she could have gotten the firearm. He did not own firearms, and he does not know any friends or relatives who she would go to obtain a firearm. In the interview of Mr. Jaynes, the interview of Mr. Jaynes was recorded and a copy was provided to Detective DeCurr for the case file. Exact details of the interview can be obtained from the video recording. Now, I want to make a mention of this firearm, the FN 5.7. That is an extremely expensive gun. The average cost is around $1,300. Even used, they're over $1,000. So in the rounds, and as far as the ammunition goes, when you compare that with other rounds for other, like say 9mm, 38s and stuff like that, the ammunition for this particular gun is expensive. This gun is typically used like for self-protection for someone. It is very lightweight, easy to hold, easy to handle, not heavy like a lot of firearms, but it's used mainly for protection. It's purchased and obtained for the purpose of protecting somebody, not used to go out and spend all that money just to fire it once. And not to be crude, and I do not mean disrespect, but you've got to look at this from the investigative and logical point of view. Who is going to spend $1,300 on a gun and then spend more money for expensive ammunition? Because you can't just buy one bullet, you have to buy the whole box. Load that magazine with multiple rounds and then only fire it once, and that is to kill yourself. That doesn't make sense. You know, most people would just, if they're that desperate to purchase a gun that they don't want tracked, you would go and buy something off the street, and that is not something a person on the street is going to sell for cheap. They just don't. Okay, to continue. Detectives received verbal permission from the homeowner and mother of the deceased, Miss Jaynes, to inspect the bedroom of Ms. Jaynes Jennifer's boyfriend, which was also shared by Ms. Jaynes, when he was in town and at the residence. Nothing of any obvious evidentiary matter was observed. The closet and bathroom contained both male and female clothing and items. A mattress was observed on the floor, and a chest of drawers contained miscellaneous personal items. Last page of page 3 of... Or is this Decker now? Okay, now we have Decker's report. I'm sorry, that was the end of Shepard's. Now we're on to Decker's report. Monday, November 25, 2019. On this date, I was notified of a possible suicide, good, thank you, involving Jennifer Jaynes at her residence located at 1327 Bridle Path, Lindale, Smith County, Texas. I was notified that patrol deputies were on scene and awaiting detectives' arrival. I then marked en route to the call location and arrived a short time later. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at all of these guys' spelling. I don't know if they're right typing out their reports or if they have someone else typing them out. But please hire someone who knows grammar and typing. This is just, all of your reports are atrocious. Once arriving at the location, detectives were advised by Deputy Wedgeworth that the deceased, Jaynes, was in an office, standalone building that was located in the backyard and unattached to the residence. Detectives were informed that no persons or animals were in the building with Jaynes, and the building had been secured by patrol deputies. At the location in the main residence were Jaynes' mother, Rita O'Brien, and her ex-husband, Brian Jaynes. Well, Jennifer's ex-husband, Brian Jaynes. Again, not good with the clarification here. Both appeared to be visibly upset and in a state of shock. Detectives McClanahan and Shepard and I then walked through the main residence into the backyard and to the building. The building was relatively small in size, with one door into the structure and a single window which had an AC unit attached. Once in the single-room building, I observed an office-like room with a desk, computer, 3 bookshelf-like stands. So there are 3 stands that were probably used that looked like bookshelves. So there was enough room to have a desk, a computer, 3 bookshelves, and a table and 3 chairs. One of these chairs was a lounging-style chair with multiple blankets and a pillow on it. Jaynes was found in this chair by O'Brien. So she's in the chair with blankets and pillows. I then observed Jaynes lying on her back on the ground with a large wound on the left side of her head. I next observed a black handgun lying on the left side of the chair when seated, and Jaynes' right hand on top of the weapon. On the chair was a large amount of blood. on the left upper portion with a large amount of pooling blood on the ground next to left and behind the chair. And there you have it. That is all of the reports. Still don't have anything from the Officer Goodman. I would really like to hear what he had to say. But right here, to me, there's not enough investigation that has been done at this point to determine that this is suicide. There is enough here in their reports to give suspect that it could be something other than suicide. That being the state of rigor. Now, rigor can take place anywhere from 2, 3, 4 hours after death. And it takes, I think, roughly 12, 14 hours. And it all depends on the environment and the temperature. But I think it takes somewhere like 10 to 12 hours for it to be full on set in rigor. And then it slowly dissipates. But the fact that she's wearing a nightgown and the temperature there, I looked up the temperature and it was quite cold. The low dropped that morning between the 24th and the 25th to roughly 34 degrees. That's just barely above freezing. So how and why? There's no mention of a coat. There's no mention of a robe. There's no mention of anything other than blankets and a pillow in that office building. But she's in a short summer type nightgown. Again, that's one thing I find odd. And the gun, this high-priced gun and ammunition, I find suspect. The pooling of the blood, where was her body truly found? Until some of these questions can be answered, there's no way I would state suicide. It just is not fitting the narrative at this point. Doesn't mean it can't or it won't, because we don't have all of the investigative evidence yet. But right now, there are things that I find truly suspect, and mainly the comments by the ex-husband. A lot of his narrative where he's pushing she was depressed and she wanted the divorce, and he found out she had a boyfriend. And that is the implication there is that she had a boyfriend prior to their divorce, and so that's why she wanted one, but yet it was still amicable, but oh, she was so depressed. And again, a lot of narrative planting. A lot of it. Nothing which can be backed up or corroborated. And yet, and two, where they state, the police officers have here that one of the witnesses was Jennifer's boyfriend, yet there's no statement from him. We have crickets from him, and that I find odd as well. Because obviously she loved him, he loved her, they were together, seemed very happy together, and yet it's very quiet and they have nothing from him. He had spent the last months of her life with her. If anyone would know her better at this point in her life, it would be Burke. So I hope that maybe one day there will be some type of a report from him. But as of now, that's what we have, and we will continue.